When I was 8 years old, my parents took my brother and me to the circus. While they waited in line for tickets, we played on the wheelchair ramp handlebars like they were monkey bars. We liked to climb and hang from them. But my brother and I didn't always get along, and we ended up getting into a small argument. He shoved me into the handlebar. My left shoulder hit the bar, but my automatic reaction wasn't a feeling of physical pain. It was a feeling of loss in my right arm. I could feel that my left arm was cold from the metal and sore from the impact, but none of that was in my right arm. I was unbalanced. I was uncomfortable. My heart started to beat faster and my chest started to tighten. I needed the feelings in my left arm to exist in my right. So I got up and I ran myself into that bar, this time making sure to hit it with my right arm. But embarrassingly, I ran too quickly. I hit the bar too hard. So I got up again, and this time I made sure to hit it with my left arm. It was hard to ensure that my arms felt exactly the same, so I had to run into that bar multiple times, which left me with bruises so severe that I had to go to physiotherapy. When I was a child, I deduced that everything with respect to one's body needed to be symmetrical. If I touched something with my left hand, I automatically assumed I needed to repeat that action with my right. If this need for balance didn't come forth, I believed bad things would follow. I am not exactly sure what these bad things were, but I knew I was never willing to wait to find out. I'll explain what this feels like. It's like being underwater for an extended period of time. You're holding your breath, and it's scary. And without even thinking about it, your body naturally tells you that bad things will happen if you stay underwater. Your body tells you to fight to get out of that situation. That's the way my body felt every time I touched something asymmetrically. This feeling is not desirable, so I always touch things 2, 4, even 8 times if necessary. This should have been an obvious indicator that I was different, but just like breathing, I honestly thought everyone did these things. I didn't even tell my parents I did these things. I thought nothing of my childish games that sought symmetry and relief. Just like younger Samantha, who was clearly unaware of her disorder, society often misinterprets the true meaning of OCD. I have searched the hashtag OCD on Instagram, and here are just a few examples of what you can find. OCD is an organized closet. OCD is an adjective you can use to describe the level of clean you can have your car. Apparently, OCD is also aesthetically appealing, organized M&M candies. Sometimes people can even be OCD-ish. And this last one's my personal favorite. Instagram now diagnoses people OCD-ing. Posts like this make me cringe. What is OCD really? OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. It's one of many anxiety disorders, and it all starts with the obsessions. The obsessions are the recurring uncomfortable thoughts and worries that lead to the compulsions. The compulsions are in response to those obsessions, attempting to satisfy them. And it becomes a disorder when your obsessions and compulsions take up so much of your time that you're unable to move through your day normally. I have obsessive compulsive disorder. My OCD manifests itself in a number of ways, but the 3 main concepts that I wrangle with are symmetry, perfectionism, and time management. The symmetry theory that I developed as a child has followed me to date. To this day, I am still terrified that bad things will happen if my interactions with objects occur in an asymmetrical manner. I spend a good portion of my time touching things twice or avoiding touching things at all. Ideally, I'd be able to go through the day touching nothing. This need for symmetry often moves beyond the physical and takes shape within my mind as well. While walking on city streets or even within my own home, I avoid the lines on the ground because I believe I can feel them beneath my feet. There is nothing scarier than the grout between the kitchen and bathroom tiles. Conveniently, I get to stand up here walking around on a carpet. I avoid door handles because the cold metal sensation takes a lot for me to recuperate from. Anytime I'm itchy, I'm really twice as itchy. Anytime anyone pats me on the back or shakes my hand, I have to fix it. Any sort of physical encounter requires a great deal of remediation. An average day for me means avoiding 32 different sections of lines on the ground, 60 fixes for any time anyone touches me or bumps into me, mentally preparing for 124 door handles, 270 casual encounters anytime I have to touch something, and 420 itches. In total, that's 906 obsessive-compulsive thoughts that occur within one day. And that's only symmetry related. I'm also a perfectionist. Growing up, I spent hours ensuring that my binders were nothing short of a perfectly color-coded textbook. I had a number of very specific rules that needed to be followed. Just a few included. All notes from one subject must be taken in a minimum of 2 colors. Notes must appear aesthetically balanced. The handwriting, the pen, and the paper must remain the same through the entire year. Absolutely no food stains, no grease stains, no creases, no crinkles, and in subjects where it was possible, notes should be retyped at home. I was always developing new rules for myself, and in the 9th grade, I decided that the best way to have a consistent binder was to have typed notes. But I didn't have a laptop, so I took handwritten notes in class, I came home, and I typed my notes out on a desktop. I printed them, and I put them in my binder. And if at any point these notes became creased or crinkled, which of course they did, I would take them out of my binder, place them on my mother's ironing board, and iron them. I spent hours doing this. If at any point I looked down at my binders and I didn't see perfection, my heart would instantly begin to beat faster. My chest would tighten. I was so anxious that it hurt. It was easier to deal with my binders than to live with my own anxiety. But then I started university. In university, you don't have time to type up your notes or iron them. So I stopped taking them, which, as you can imagine, had an adverse effect on my grades. But it doesn't end there. I also spend a great deal of my time on time management-related OCD. I always mentally prepare for my day. I always have a plan. I even plan to plan my next plan. Whenever I have work to do, I look at the number of tasks I have to do, the number of days I have to do it in, take 1 from the number of days to, of course, allot for error, divide the number of tasks by this new number of days, and bam, I have a perfectly balanced week with proportionate amounts of work for every day. Conveniently, I have a degree in mathematics, so these minor daily calculations are fairly trivial. However, I often find myself in situations where I am incredibly anxious because I don't know where my day is going to lead me. Life doesn't always go as planned. The large theme within my OCD gravitates towards balance. It's fundamental in my symmetry, my perfectionism, and in the way I organize my day. Now you may be asking yourselves, why or how does this add any real value or meaning into my everyday life? The need to double tap items, myself, and even unfortunately other people, can truly be seen as a disadvantage. And while there are moments in my life that I would definitely agree with you, there is an overall understanding within me that life has a need for balance. Too often, I hear people refer to OCD casually as a joke or as a deficiency. OCD keeps me balanced. How many people can say they live a balanced life? I can assure you, this need for balance is not something that I came up with for the convenience of this talk. It's prominent throughout many cultures and traditions. Aristotle defined a healthy life as one with a balanced soul, with neither excesses nor deficiencies. In life, we all rely on balance to help ground us, to help make important decisions. My manifestation of balance is no doubt a compulsion to satisfy my disorder, but it does construct a mental model within me, one that guides me to lead a healthy life. Growing up, I maintained my work in such a way that would ensure balance and consistency. I rewrote notes. Yes, this took a lot of extra time and energy, but it was so beneficial to my learning. Repetition is generally a study tactic that teachers advise students to do, something my disorder forced me to do, making me naturally a good student. Again, rewriting, retyping notes, lots of time, lots of energy. But it speaks to my fundamental nature. I believe everything I do and produce is a direct reflection of me. So I always try my best. I habitually give 110%. But at some point, as I said, my best stopped making sense. In university, I did stop taking notes. But then my dad gave me an iPad. I learned to take handwritten notes on an iPad. My notes were never crinkled or creased. They never had food or grease stains on them. And if I needed to, I could print these notes. This changed my life. This is a skill I've been able to share with students, colleagues, and friends. Students have different learning needs, and for some of them, the use of an iPad is beneficial. I have helped a number of different students adapt their learning to use an iPad as their primary note-taking device. But more importantly, through my OCD, I learned to be adaptable and open to new ideas. My need to equally distribute my work week may be quirky, but it's healthy. I regularly have time for work, leisure, and exercise. Over the years, I've strongly minimized doing last-minute work as the thought of an impending deadline gives me increased levels of anxiety, which generally means I produce better work. I often hear the expression, I work better under pressure. I have OCD. I am literally always under pressure. OCD has given me so many positives, but when I went to the doctors for help, they immediately offered me medication, and I strongly thought about taking it. But then I realized that so much of me is rooted in my OCD that I didn't want to get rid of it. I just wanted to handle it better, and ideally, one day, embrace it. All of my ambition and my intensity comes from my OCD, and I need that to be successful. Society and its need to normalize everyone is an attempt to create a standard we should all fit into, one that I just don't fit into. It's disheartening to think that anxiety disorders are seen as exclusively negative. As a community, we are becoming addicted to quick fixes like drugs, and we are not taking the time to appreciate the benefits of these conditions. I said no to drugs and said yes to CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. I am not here to say that anti-anxiety medication is unacceptable. I just felt that I would have lost a small piece of me if I had taken it. Doctors have told me I have an obsessive-compulsive disorder, but I prefer to call it an obsessive-compulsive advantage. Thank you.
Eight. That's how many times I have to blink after waking up to a day full of very, very strange rituals. Now, careful not to get out of my bed with the wrong foot, and I am off to some algebra. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Most people think that OCD means obsessively washing your hands and trying to align everything. Trust me, things are about to get a lot more fucked up as we carry on. Now it's time to attempt leaving the house. I start by lifting my hand off the doorknob using a very specific slow movement. I enter the elevator and I stop it, obviously. You didn't think I'd leave without checking the door, did you? Don't be silly. I'll be back. At least twice. Yeah, there it is. I go down, I enter the car, doing pretty well so far, no intrusive thoughts for the past 30 seconds, think I'm going very combo here. And then Mr. Satan comes along and whispers into my ear, "Did you check the window steps lights, Power?" And I reply, "Yes, Mr. Satan, I did. But I have to go back and I have to check, otherwise I get the feeling something terrible might happen." I love to eat, but I am pretty sure that if loaves of bread with unevenly spread butter were the only food available on earth, I would starve to death. I also avoid certain meals just because they have a weird texture that reminds me of worms, and I have to touch specific objects many times until it feels just right. But now that I think of it, that sounded weirdly sexual, so please don't take this out of context. Anyway, here comes the messed up part. I get these terrible urges to ride off the road, hit a tree, jump off the bridge, run over my ex-boyfriend, and then I am sitting there wondering, am I really capable of doing all these things? I don't want to die necessarily, I don't want to kill anyone, though my ex is asking for it. And you might be sitting there thinking, sweet Jesus, how do I file a restraining order against this crazy bitch? And I can't really blame you, but let me explain how intrusive thoughts work. Most of us get them, but normal people leave them behind and they cheerfully get back to watching funny cat videos online. Now, if you have OCD, you will start picking each thought apart, and the next thing you know, you are stuck with a bunch of new rituals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that make you look like you are high on acid. And there is a part of me that knows all of this is utterly stupid and pointless, but giving in and, performing some witchcraft is always so much easier than having to face the terrible thoughts my mind projects. I'm 27 and I am scared to death if I leave my bathroom door open. I'd really like to be in charge, but at the end of the day, I know I just can't stop.
My first encounter with obsessive compulsive disorder was Nicolas Cage's character in the movie Matchstick Men, who apparently had a combination of OCD and Tourette's syndrome. The jerking motions and vocal outbursts were due to the Tourette's, and the obsessive cleaning and things like locking the door multiple times was due to the OCD. Though we only see these behaviors when he forgets his medication, and otherwise he's a smooth and successful con man. Now, I personally don't have OCD, and frankly the term seems to be used lightly too often. A lot of people don't realize how serious OCD can be. Lightheartedly saying, "I'm so OCD," because you like to keep your desk really tidy, is almost like saying, "I'm so leukemia," because your nose is runny. What I'm interested in is how the brain of somebody with OCD works, so I can figure out how to deal with a much less dire but very annoying behavior of mine. Some mornings, I'll be 5 minutes away from my apartment and will suddenly think, wait, did I lock the door? I know I just have to rush back and check, or it will bother me for at least the next hour. This happens maybe 3 times a week, and every single time I go back to check, the door was indeed locked. Luckily, going back and checking like this is enough, and I can get on with my day after that. But I was curious, what happens in my brain that makes me do this? And how is it different from someone who has, for example, the compulsion to lock and relock their door 50 times just so they feel comfortable? Well, there are 3 parts of the brain that come into play here. A part of the frontal lobe called the orbital cortex is responsible for detecting when you think you've done something correctly and when you think you've made a mistake. E.T. Rolls, a behavioral psychologist at Oxford University, found that the cells in rhesus monkey's orbital cortex would fire when the monkey performed a task properly and was expecting some juice as a reward. However, when the monkeys performed the task properly as they were instructed but got salt water instead, the orbital cortex lit up much more intensely and stayed lit up longer. The conclusion was that the orbital cortex is your brain's error detection system. In general, the strong firing of the orbital cortex gives you a feeling of something is wrong. After the orbital cortex fires, it sends a signal to another area called the cingulate gyrus, which will make you feel uneasy until you do something to correct the mistake. Then, once the mistake is corrected, a third area called the caudate nucleus activates and acts like an automatic gear shift, allowing you to switch gears, forget about it, and get on with other activities. In my case, I thought something was wrong and felt anxious until I went back and checked on the door. Then my gears shift, and I got on with my day. Brain scans of OCD patients show that all three of these brain areas are hyperactive. This means the something is wrong feeling and the anxiety that comes with it are abnormally strong. So even with incredibly trivial imperfections in something like, say, the fibers on a carpet, the OCD afflicted person feels that a terrible mistake has been made and the consequences will be absolutely horrible. This is why OCD can result in such irrational obsessions like, if I don't vacuum the carpet 5 times, my parents will die. As Norman Doidge explains in The Brain That Changes Itself, what happens in people with OCD is that their gear shifter, the caudate nucleus, becomes extremely sticky. This means that even if the person does something to correct the mistake their brain is detecting, that feeling doesn't go away. Their brain can't shift to the next gear, and they stay very anxious. Most people who have OCD are actually aware of the fact that their worries and behaviors are completely illogical. But since the orbital cortex and the cingulate gyrus are stuck in the on position, they are strongly compelled to repeatedly attempt to correct the imaginary mistake. UCLA research psychiatrist Jeffrey Schwartz calls this situation brain lock, and in his book titled Brain Lock, he describes a very effective behavioral therapy for OCD. To understand it, let's look at hand washing, a common OCD obsession. In the behavioral therapy, when an OCD patient has the urge to wash their hands again, even though they're already clean, they are to first mindfully acknowledge that the urge to do this is simply a result of a faulty circuit in their brain, and that nothing bad will actually happen if they don't wash their hands again. They then have to manually shift their gear by right away doing some other constructive activity for as long as they can. The urge to give into a compulsion is usually overwhelming, so Dr. Schwartz recommends to start by waiting at least 15 minutes before giving into it, and then expand that time day by day. With consistent practice, this manual gear shifting becomes an automatic habit, to where when the urge to do some compulsive behavior arises, their immediate reaction is to first identify the compulsion as simply the result of brain lock, and then move on to another activity. Brain scans of OCD patients who use this behavioral therapy show that after a while, the problem-causing hyperactive caudate nucleus in the brain had actually become less active compared to before therapy. As Dr. Schwartz says, we can now say we have scientifically demonstrated that by changing your behavior, you can change your brain. I didn't realize it at first, but this was essentially the strategy I used back when I was quitting sugar. Whenever I got an urge to go buy some sweet garbage from the convenience store, I stood up, set a timer for 20 minutes, and started reading something. Sometimes I would give in and buy the snack after the 20 minutes were up, but I just made sure to increase the time on the timer each day. Pretty soon I was setting the timer for an hour, and after a while the immediate message in my head transformed from, I want sugar, time to get some snacks, to, I want sugar, time to stand up and read. Alright, so back to my door double checking issue. As someone with a properly functioning caudate nucleus, what's the solution to keep me from wasting my time? As Norman Doidge explains, we often check and recheck things without really concentrating. So he suggests to perform the first check with the utmost care. If you're moving so fast during your morning routine without paying attention and being distracted by something like an audiobook, the problem-solved circuit doesn't get processed when locking the door the first time, and the gear in the brain doesn't turn. By simply taking a moment to slow down and be aware of what I'm doing as I check the coffee maker and head out the door, I now no longer get the urge to go back and check again later. Getting my lost 15 or 20 minutes a week back is nice, but more importantly for me, it's nice to no longer be asking, what the hell is wrong with me?
Hey there, welcome to Life Noggin. Have you ever heard someone say, I'm so clean, I'm OCD? You might think that having OCD just means being a neat freak, but actually, obsessive compulsive disorder is a serious ailment that only affects about 2% of the population. People with OCD are plagued with unwanted thoughts, behaviors, or mental images that repeat over and over. They might feel like objects in a room have to be perfectly aligned, or they may worry obsessively about harming others. even if they would never actually do anything. And yes, some people with OCD obsess over germs and cleanliness, but it's different than just wanting your house tidy. For those with the disorder, their obsession feels out of their control. It can be debilitating, and cleaning won't solve the problem. These obsessions are typically intertwined with compulsions, repeated actions the person has to do just to function. If someone is obsessed with germs, they might wash their hands over and over even after they logically know that they are clean. Or if they obsessed with safety, they might force themselves to check that the doors are locked and that the stove is off dozens of times before they can leave the house. They might also feel the need to repeat a certain word or count their steps. Although OCD can take many forms, there are some things that everyone with the disorder has in common. In order to be diagnosed, the obsessions or compulsions must be extremely time-consuming and take up at least an hour a day. Almost everyone with OCD knows their thoughts aren't logical, but they can't stop themselves, and they usually don't enjoy their compulsions. It's just the only way they can reduce their anxiety and stress. So for those suffering, it can hurt to hear others use the term OCD without understanding what it fully means. You might say that you have OCD because you like things to be organized, but it's a passing thought that you can shrug off. Having real OCD means not being able to let go of those thoughts. Lots of studies have shown that those with OCD actually have slightly different brain function than those without. Although scientists are still learning how the disorder works, many think it has to do with the changes in the circuit of the brain called the cortical striatal pathway, which regulates habit and repeated action. Recent studies have focused on trying to find medications that bind to receptors in that pathway. If the studies are successful, they may be able to develop medication that specifically targets OCD symptoms. This would be a huge leap forward. Currently, doctors typically prescribe general antidepressants for OCD. They also recommend behavioral therapy. This includes exposure therapy, where patients are carefully exposed to fearful situations without being allowed to act on their compulsions. For the small amount of people who don't respond to either drugs or therapy, there are more invasive procedures. Around 300 people have undergone something called DBS, or deep brain stimulation, which is when electrodes are implanted in the brain to control impulses in some of the cortical striatal regions. When the electrodes are activated, they cause the brain of someone with OCD to have the same neural activity as someone without. The treatment has been a huge success. Almost all DBS patients say the procedure improved their mood and self-confidence, and most regained a normal quality of life. Although OCD can be debilitating, these types of treatments offer hope that one day soon, everyone with the disorder will be able to find relief and take back control of their life. I hope you gained a better understanding of OCD, and let me know in the comment section below what other science topics you would like us to talk about. If you enjoyed this video, then you should definitely watch our video where we tackle the question, can you have more than one personality? Check it out. To get this disorder, you'd have to have 2 or more identities that can take control of your behavior, and they have to have different memories and feelings of self. There are only a few people who have actually been documented with this psychological condition, but you've probably heard of it thanks to movies and television. My name is Blocko, this has been Life Noggin. Don't forget to keep on thinking.